The school was shut down for 1 year, 1881 to 1882. And after that, they decided, wow, we've got to do better. So they created dormitories. They didn't have dormitories before that. The students lived with families in the village around the college. And they began to try to put work-study ideas. They began to get more Bible in there, but there was too much conflict with the faculty. And so change didn't happen. By the end of the decade, one of the really great educators of Adventist history, W. Prescott. Prescott becomes the president of Battle Creek College. He also is the first director of what they call the Seventh-day Adventist Educational Society. It's now a part of the church, and it's called the Department of Education, a part of the General Conference.
A key moment is when W. Prescott is appointed the president, and Prescott is a man who works closely with Ellen White, values her counsel, and is also just a human dynamo, incredibly energetic, himself has an excellent first-rate education by the standards of the day, and so is able, as it were, to speak to two different constituencies, you might say. One, the people who say, well, we want our children to go to an Adventist college so that they have a good moral surrounding, but we want them to have a first-rate education. But he can also speak to those Adventists who say, well, we want Adventist values, and especially the concepts that have been set out by Sister White. We want them to get that. So he can speak to both groups and, as it were, reassure them.
Battle Creek College really entered a golden era during his presidency. He was very well trained. He had the educational background that was valued, was prestigious, but he also was committed to the idea of an Adventist college. And he really wrestled with the idea of how to bring those two things together. He was a very well-rounded person, and the school thrived under him. The enrollment grew, and it was the best period probably for Battle Creek College.
That brings us to the 1890s. Prescott is getting the Bible more into Battle Creek College. He's trying to do some other things, but he's having a hard time. And then at that same time, Ellen White is in Australia with the Avondale School. Prescott takes the boat, they go over there, they talk about her counsel, and she says, oh, Brother Prescott, he helped me understand what I'd written. He understood the education, she understood what she'd written, but how to apply it, nobody seemed to understand. And so you have a practical educator sitting down with the prophet about 1896, and she's saying, this man, Prescott, he's like my husband. He asks questions and makes me come out and expand upon my thoughts, and suddenly I'm beginning to see more clearly how we can implement that. And of course, at the same time, Brother Prescott is beginning to understand. And so it's the late 1890s that Ellen White's educational philosophy is not only understood, but it also becomes the philosophy, more specifically, of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
La reinauguración del Battle Creek College no solo dio inicio a una nueva etapa en la aplicación de la filosofía de la educación adventista, sino que además abrió las puertas para que nuevas instituciones educativas comenzaran a surgir de este a oeste y de norte a sur en el continente norteamericano.
As we noted already, Battle Creek College had a problem in 1881. It reopened in 1882, but when it reopened, there would be two other colleges that opened at the same time. Actually, they were more like secondary schools, but definitions were pretty porous back in those days. So, in California, way out on the western coast of North America, we find Pacific Union College, and the new president there will be Sidney Brownsberger, the same man who'd been president back at Battle Creek College, but now Brownsberger understands Adventist education a bit more. So he starts over there with some reform ideas. Meanwhile, way on the east coast of the United States, up in Massachusetts, we have Goodloe Harper Bell. Goodloe Harper Bell was the man who was the chief teacher in the 1872 Battle Creek School and taught there up until 1881.
A lot of the people who were involved at Battle Creek College went out and started these other schools. Goodloe Harper Bell went east after he stopped teaching at Battle Creek, and he had an influence in starting the Adventist schools in Massachusetts. Edward Sutherland, who was a student at Battle Creek College, helped to start Walla Walla College, and so on. So the people who were involved at Battle Creek College helped to sow the seeds of education in other places as well.
Our education went from one school, Battle Creek College, to now having three schools. So we had Michigan, and then Sidney Brownsberger is in Healdsburg, California, starts the school that eventually becomes Pacific Union College, which continues to this day. It was moved. And going east, Professor Bell and others, S.N. Haskell, start South Lancaster Academy, which becomes Atlantic Union College. And so then we went from 1 to 3. And of course it grew from there, and we had other schools started.
By the early 1880s, Adventist education is beginning to spread out. And by 1890, you get Union College, 1892, that's in Nebraska, the center part of the country. Then 1892, Walla Walla College up in Washington State. And then soon after that, Avondale. And it's not long after that that we begin to create educational institutions in South America, Inter-America, Europe. Why? Because now we're becoming a worldwide church, and we need to create educational institutions in these other countries to train ministers and teachers and editors and all these people that the church needs. So by the end of the century, you're finding Adventist education becoming an international educational system.
As the church spreads, it takes its institutions with it. It creates hospitals and sanitaria, publishing houses, and it creates schools and colleges. The first college to be created is outside of Battle Creek, is Healdsburg College, which was created in California. But then you get other schools starting to spread. There's the creation of a secondary school in South Lancaster, Massachusetts, which develops and becomes Atlantic Union College. You have the creation of schools of nursing associated with the different sanitaria. You have the creation also of Claremont College in South Africa, though that too, as so often, Adventist educational institutions tend to be in the same places as health institutions, and Claremont College is near a Claremont Sanitarium as it happens. But then you also start to get the creation of a range of industrial training schools, is the sorts of language that's very often used. And you find that in Huntsville, Alabama, the predecessor of what becomes Oakwood University today, in Alberta, the predecessor of what today is Canadian University College, and in other places. And that's significant because This is a different sort of philosophy.
A medida que la filosofía de la educación adventista arribó a nuevos destinos, su historia se amplía y diversifica, incluyendo nuevos personajes, ajenas geografías e intensos desafíos superados con convicción y fe en esta filosofía, inspirada por Dios para beneficio de las futuras generaciones.
Ellen White plays an absolutely critical, pivotal role in the development of Seventh-day Adventist educational philosophy. Adventists like to talk about the blueprint. And that actually is probably not the right word, because a blueprint is a very specific set of drawings that tells you exactly how our building should be constructed. Ellen White doesn't create that, but what she does have is a very clear philosophy and very clear general guidelines. First, the scriptures need to be studied. The Bible, she says, is the greatest book in human history, and indeed, who can argue with that? And therefore, students should be taught from the Bible. And using the scriptures, he says, you can not only teach theology, you can teach a range of other, you can use it in teaching in a range of other disciplines as well. But certainly, if you come out of an Adventist education, you need to be well drilled in the scriptures. Secondly, however, Ellen White is very concerned with practical skills, with skills that can be used in work and that can be valuable for the rest of your life, rather than just the 3 or 4 years that one is at a college or university.
Ella escribió repetidamente de que la educación adventista debería involucrar el trabajo y la educación por medio del trabajo, y que eso debería ser una característica esencial en la filosofía de la educación adventista. Y por supuesto, junto con eso, el concepto de que educamos toda la persona y no solamente su intelecto, que lo educamos en forma espiritual, también en aspectos físicos, que no solamente incluyen habilidades prácticas, sino también una conciencia de la salud, que era también un tema revolucionario para ese tiempo, y que también los aspectos sociales, por ejemplo, el servicio, el testimonio. Así que era una filosofía que involucraba a toda la persona de manera integral.
Basic to it is the concept of redemption. She was interested in education as a way of holistically bringing a person back to what God wanted. And, very often Adventists have a poor idea of our educational system, but in actual fact, what we are aiming to do is to not just fix up the brain, to make the brain better, but to give a person intellectual knowledge and to give a person a heart, a desire for what God wants us to be and to do, and to help us to act properly. And so it's not just fixing up the mind, but making the whole person a better person. And it seems to me that Adventist education aims to do that. To change the heart first, which then changes the mind, which results in the acts. So as Christians, we are living a life that reflects not just an intellectual understanding of God, but an experiential understanding of God.
Adventist education should prepare the heart, the head, and the hand. It should be a blend of the intellectual and the social and the physical and the spiritual. I think the goal for Adventist education is probably best summed up in Luke 2:52, which is kind of a report card of Jesus himself. It tells us that Jesus increased in wisdom and stature, in favor with God and man. He grew intellectually. He grew physically. he grew socially, and he also grew spiritually. I think Adventist education will only succeed if it integrates all four of those components. It's like a table with 4 legs. That table is rather unstable with only 3 legs. We need all 4 to really succeed at what God is calling us to do.
When you want to educate the whole person, you can't forget the mind, and you can't forget the spirit, the religious side of a person's life, and you can't forget their physical side. And since Adventists kept that as kind of the center of their message, to have people equipped for the second coming so they could work for God, live longer so they could work for God longer, that really moved the church into caring deeply about education. And then we broadened it, of course, as schools became accredited. We joined accrediting bodies and all those things. But basically, I think the movement from training just people to work for the church to recognize that there was a gift in training the whole person to be a better citizen and to be ethical and to let this Christianity flow out of there into mission. Certainly those were all motivations in the early church to build an educational system.
Pero cuando la misión es cambiar un paradigma, el reto es más que conocer la teoría. El desafío es saber aplicarla, pasar de la intención a la acción, de la causa al efecto y de la hipótesis a la experiencia.
In the late 1890s, Adventist education was beginning to become more practically focused. This includes the establishment of the American Medical Missionary College, a medical school for training doctors now, not just nurses. It was established in Battle Creek and associated with Battle Creek Sanitarium, and thus under the leadership of John Harvey Kellogg, which creates its own problems and tensions. But still, you now actually have a school to train nurses, another school to train doctors, and in 1897, you have the creation of a teacher training program at Battle Creek College. So increasingly, Adventist education is becoming more practical in the sense of creating practical courses. But in addition, there's a new, more practical ethos that's spreading across Adventist education in general. And so, places like the training schools in Alberta in Canada and Alabama in the South, and the new training school that's set up in Australia at Avondale in 1897, have a different ethos, and it's an ethos that comes from Ellen White. And Ellen White talks about the need to train people in the Bible, but also to give people practical life skills, work-related skills that will stand them in good stead in the rest of their life after they go to college.
Cambiar un supuesto, descubrir nuevas formas de realizar aquello que se ha llevado a cabo siempre de la misma manera, requiere mucho más que buenas ideas y una clara filosofía. Demanda compromiso, perseverancia y la utilización de todas las herramientas disponibles para poder ejemplificar con hechos y convencer con resultados. Elena de White lo sabía.
She was writing testimonies about school. She was trying to work with the administrators to get them to understand. Some administrators were easier to work with than others. Some personalities resonated better with the plan that God gave her, or what He showed her. But it wasn't until she got to Australia in the 1890s that she really could implement what she understood God was saying we should do in terms of Christian education.
When she went to Australia, she had a chance for a fresh start. There were no other Adventist schools there. And so as she had influence over the establishment of Avondale College, she expressed these ideas of work and study and worship and how those all should be balanced, physical activity, how these should be balanced, how an education should be practical and spiritual and intellectual all at once. And this has been a special hallmark of Adventist education. Some speak of the blueprint. There's not really a blueprint, but it's a quick and short way to refer to this idea of holistic education, where we pay attention to the body and the social life, the practical, and the spiritual, as they all work in balance with one another. And our research into Adventist education shows that that pays off. I think we don't really understand how it does. We have more to understand, but we've been on this journey to discover how to describe really how Adventist education works. And we have not discovered anything different than what Ellen White was writing about in those years when she was influencing the establishment of Avondale College.
The place that Ellen White really did kind of set up an example of this was in Australia. Because when she started Avondale College, I shouldn't say she, but she was a part of it. She was one of the founders. There were others. But her determination was that this school will be more like God intended educationally. Not that what was happening in Battle Creek was evil or anything like that, but it was not meeting the goal just the way she and others had come to realize it from the Lord. So Avondale College became a school to represent this type of education.
Fundado en 1897, el posteriormente conocido como Avondale College dio inicio a una revolución que traspasó fronteras, marcando un antes y un después en la forma de ejecutar los principios de la filosofía de la educación adventista, no solo localmente, sino a nivel mundial.
1897, Battle Creek College will go through a revolution. It will be stimulated by several things. Number one, it will be stimulated by Ellen White's calls for reform in Australia. Some people were very sensitive to that. One of those was a man by the name of Edward Alexander Sutherland, who become the first president of Walla Walla College in 1892. By 1897, at the year 32 years of age, he went to Battle Creek. Now, Battle Creek was the central educational institution of the church. And there, he decided to put the reforms into practice, but he took things too far. Well, part of the problem was he came under some very dynamic leaders that tended to be a little on the fanatical side. One of them was Alonzo T. Jones, the great hero of the 1888 meetings. He was teaching such things as the Bible should be the only textbook. You should teach geography from the Bible. You should teach English from the Bible, or Spanish. You should teach mathematics from the Bible. The Bible should, so we're getting into this fanaticism. And unfortunately, this young man, Sutherland, and his academic dean, Percy T. McGann, they got carried away with some of these fanatical ideas. The first thing they did is they went out and they had a football field. They plowed it up and had the students plant potatoes in the playing field. Then they did away with academic degrees. We're not going to have any academic degrees. Academic degrees are evil. So they did some good things, though. They put the Bible at the center, but they tried, to make everything Bible. And so you get a revolution in 97, but it goes too far. And finally, these two men, after 4 years in Battle Creek, they moved the school to Berrien Springs, Michigan, out on a farm. It becomes Emmanuel Missionary College, today known as Andrews University. But there, they did away with it. They didn't have any degrees. No. We're going to make a bunch of missionary farmers. And so no degrees. They went on a 2-meal-a-day plan. The students only got to eat twice a day. They worked all day and studied a little bit in the evening. And it wasn't even chartered as a college. It was chartered as a charitable institution. And so, we had a great Reformation in 97, but it went to the opposite extreme. And that brings us to another man in Adventist history, and that is a man that's very little known, and that's Frederick Griggs. Well, Griggs University, which is the correspondence arm of the Adventist university system, is named after Griggs. Griggs was a moderate. He said, Reformation is not annihilation, it's reform. You take the best of the old and the best of the new and you put it together. And so with Griggs, we begin to find a return in Battle Creek College, granting of degrees, and an emphasis not only on the practical but also on the intellectual, so with balance. And Adventist education at its best was brought in by men like Frederick Griggs.
Nacida en la firme voluntad divina, la educación adventista fue creciendo y madurando en manos de hombres y mujeres comprometidos con esta misión. Una obra divina ahora confiada a manos humanas que, a pesar de sus singularidades, ideas y objetivos, comprendían y reconocían al gran maestro. El maestro con mayúscula, aquel que es el autor y sustentador de la verdadera educación.
Fuimos aprendiendo a medida que avanzábamos. Y eso es lo que debemos reconocer, que fuimos siendo orientados, me parece a mí, por Dios, a través de Elena de White y a través del pensamiento de algunos de estos directores, que fueron captando, en primer lugar, la teoría, los conceptos fundamentales y luego cómo convertirlos en práctica. Me parece que eso es lo que uno aprende leyendo la historia de los comienzos de la educación adventista. Y a medida que pasaban las décadas y los años, se fue dando cuenta el liderazgo de la Iglesia de que debía no solo formar a los líderes de la organización, sino también a los miembros. O sea, cómo ir formando la mente y las destrezas y el carácter de los que van a ser los miembros de la Iglesia. Así que fue todo un proceso escalonado que ahora mirándolo hacia atrás nos resulta claro, pero fue un modo de ir captando cada vez con más claridad ese concepto de lo que Dios quería que fuera la educación, no solo para los dirigentes, sino también para todos los miembros, que ahora nos beneficiamos de esos primeros pasos, de esos primeros aprendizajes.
Con el pasar del tiempo, las nuevas instituciones fueron creciendo y tomando forma hasta establecerse como grandes y renombrados centros de estudio, en los cuales el foco no era tan solo la transmisión de contenido, sino que el objetivo era y continúa siendo la formación de seres humanos completos, que puedan impactar sus familias, sus comunidades y el mundo a través de sus acciones y del testimonio del poder de una vida entregada en las manos de Dios.